Let me just start, Tim Brown, by just asking
Yeah,
you to describe the story of Buckley's Chance.
sure. Yeah, it's a film about a boy who is living in New York City and he loses his father. He's a New York firefighter, and his father was an Australian. And due to certain circumstances, he ends up moving to the middle of the outback to live with his estranged grandfather, who he's never met. And while there, he gets lost in the outback, ends up coming across a dingo. He rescues the dingo, and of course, the him and the dingo sort of survive together as the grandfather searches for the boy with his with his mother. And sort of through that journey, he overcomes the loss of his father and sort of has a better understanding of that. And of course, the grandfather goes through a similar emotion, starting to understand and I think come to terms with the loss of his son. So it's sort of a four quadrant family film that I think is really good for grandma, grandpa, mom and dad, and the kids. But yeah, and ideally it's a bit of a feel good, heartwarming film. I certainly hope that's how people will feel about it.
You co-wrote the film as well as directed it.
Yeah, yeah, and co-wrote, co-produced, and directed it.
So, Tim Brown, very keen to know how a filmmaker deeply ensconced in the Canadian film scene finds
Mm,
himself in the Australian outback directing Bill Nighy and a bunch of local actors in
yeah.
and a dingo as well. What was your
Well,
connection with Australia? How did this come about?
I had never been to Australia prior to that, but I was desperate to go, so I figured the easiest way to get there was to write a screenplay that took place in the middle of the outback, and I would find myself there in that fashion. But we were trying to get a fish out of water type story where a boy from New York, how do we get him as far out of New York as possible? We'll put him in the middle of the outback, and I really wanted a fish out of water story. And I just felt that it provided a wonderful environment. And the more I researched about dingoes and learned a little bit about them, I felt this would be an interesting story to tell about this boy. So it really all came about from the screenplay. A lot of research. I had written it with my friend Willem. I had never been to Australia, and neither had Will. So it was a lot of research, and then developing it through that, and then finally getting there and finding locations became really. Then I started really rewriting it based on once I got there. Small things like Spencer's, homestead in the beginning was referred to as a ranch. Until you get there, you realize that there are no ranches. It's not referred to as a ranch. So small little things like that, nuances. But it came from the script. We had the idea, and it was lucky enough to find some Australian producers to partner with me and make it as an official Canadian Australian co-production. I think Australians and Canadian have a lot in common. Tremendous, great sense of humor, love to laugh, love comedy. There's a lightness to, I think, both our cultures that we don't take things that seriously. And I think we're also globally, as both culturally kind of loved around the world. Canadians and Australians can be traveling, and I think they're greeted with open arms by most countries. So I think there was an innate connection there with that. Obviously, the language was the same, and so it just seemed to work out really well for us. And I found myself there simply by writing about it. And it's not a dingo; it's actually a kelpie. Dingoes, of course, are a wild animal, and working with a dingo would have been a little more challenging and frankly a bit risky with a child actor to have a dingo with him. It could be a lot more unpredictable.
Sure.
People do have dingoes as pets. I'm of the belief, and if you've seen the film, that the dingo does belong in nature and sort of out there on its own, not living with people, and observed from afar.
Right.
So we didn't actually work with a dingo directly.
Tim, can I just nail this one point? You'd never been to
Sure.
Australia before,
No.
and this film, you say, gave you an excuse to actually come here and experience.
Always wanted. Yeah, I
Yeah,
desperately
just tell
wanted to
me
go.
about your pre-existing interest in Australia, because you could have made the exact same film in the Badlands of America. So tell me about your
Yeah, just
pre-existing interest in Australia and why you wanted to do it here.
It literally came from the story of I wanted to do it in the dingo, and I wanted to do it in the outback. I was desperate to get out there. I grew up watching George Miller films, so I always had an interest in Australian culture, and needed to get out there, needed to embrace that. But I felt the story suited it. I didn't think, I had done films, and I'm from Vancouver in Canada, so I could have made it a wolf and put him in the mountains of British Columbia, but I really wanted to see, and I think in the film it's visually represented there. But I've always enjoyed the culture, love the people. I've done a lot of business internationally, met a lot of Australians, and felt this story was best suited in that environment. So that's why I ended up. And it wasn't easy to do it there.
Mm.
I can assure you, it would have been a lot easier to do it at home. But I decided to tell that story in that place. And the more I dove into it, the more obsessed I became with getting out there and getting it done. And then once I got to visit and location scout, we initially started in Queensland and went to Winton. Was my first location to look at in December. And Winton in December is fairly warm, as you may know. But yeah, I thought visually it was utterly spectacular. There's very few places on Earth that will give you the sunrises and sunsets that certainly in Broken Hill that we would get out in the outback. It was quite awe-inspiring. So I think that visually it told a great story as well.
There were also Australian films that you'd seen or books that you'd read that cultivated this interest in our country?
Well, the story of certainly of William Buckley was part of my research in doing that. The dingo itself I found to be a fascinating animal because
Right.
its connection, it's very polarizing. I found in the outback by people that either love the animal or they truly hate it and want to get rid of it due to the nuisance that can cause to a lot of farmers. So I found that interesting. There's I don't know what else specifically that drove me. Maybe it was something more on a subconscious level, but yeah, it just felt the story itself really warranted it there. And I like the idea of a guy that had been living in a very quiet area, the grandfather. And that's really what brought me out there.
Mm.
And of
You,
course,
you, you,
yeah,
of course, would have been very aware. You just mentioned there about the divisive and polarizing nature of the dingo. We, of course,
totally.
had the Azaria Chamberlain case here, and I guess a film based on a relationship between a boy and a dog. People, I think, would easily buy into that. We certainly had the Red Dog films, which was about
Yeah.
a dog. Relationship between a child and a dingo, I guess, is a much more edgier prospect. So it is, I guess, in a way, for a family film, quite a brave decision to go with a dingo, although played by a cowboy, but going for a relationship between a dingo,
Yeah.
which has got quite a bad reputation, as you say, or a very
Mm.
troubled reputation, and a child. The
Yeah,
very,
yeah. Some people for sure, because there is a risk involved, and it's certainly not an animal you should walk up and try and pet if you are ever in the wild and come across a dingo. I don't recommend you going and trying to pet it like a dog. So I think there was a part of that was telling that story of that polarizing nature with the animal, and how some people might embrace it and others certainly quite the contrary. And I know there can be a bounty in some areas on dingoes, and they get hunted for that. So, um, there's a long history, 15,000 some odd years. Dingoes have been roaming, and they're now an endangered species out there. So I'm not making a political statement that you should save dingoes or not save dingoes. It's not the intention of the film. The intention of the film is to simply show perspective of a father that's lost a son, a boy that's lost a father, and a wife that's lost her husband, and the relationship between those three people, and how the dingo itself, and frankly how Kelton Pell, who plays Jules in the movie, an Aboriginal man, and his connection to nature, and his representation of someone who didn't have a sort of a dog in the fight, if you will, pardon the pun, but basically someone who just represented nature itself and Kelton did that, I think, beautifully in the film. Actually, I sort of think Kelton steals the movie. But yeah, I was, it was important to, it was all about the emotionality of these characters that I think was really fascinating to me. And the setting was second to none. It became a character in itself. I mean, the cinematography from Ben Nott is extraordinary, and we got some beautiful vistas, and the weather and nature gave us a lot, for sure.
I certainly appreciate what you're saying about just the great sunrises and sunsets, and the lighting that the Australian outback can give a
Mind
filmmaker, and it
blowing.
really is unmatched anywhere, isn't it?
Unmatched. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a, I didn't know how much of an appeal that was until after I had been there. And you can read about it, you can watch movies about it, and we tried to represent it as best as possible. But until you're standing under it, it was literally, well, I mean, there was one particular moment with Bill. He was in his trailer. It was early in the morning. The sun was just coming up. Actually, it was pre-dawn, and it was probably 6 o'clock in the morning. And I knocked on his trailer and said, I asked him to come outside, and he said, "Is everything okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I just want to show you something." And he'd walked outside, and I said, "Look." And he turned and he saw a sun. I can't even describe the color of the sky, but it went on forever, and it was glowing. And his jaw just dropped, and the two of us stood on the rise for about 20 minutes, said nothing, and just stared. And he turned to me afterwards, and he sort of gave me a hug, and he said, "That is the greatest sunrise I've ever seen in my entire life." And then he went back to his trailer. But it was, there are moments like that I had never seen anything like it. And it was like that pretty much every single morning.
Okay.
You just got to get up early enough to see it.
Now, with Bill Nighy, I
Mm.
wanted to ask you about him first with your director hat on, and then with your producer hat on. So, just firstly, I think it's very impressive with his Australian accent. Um, People might
He'll be
want to
thrilled to
argue
hear
over
that.
it, but I actually thought he did a really good job. Can you just tell
Yeah.
me how much prep work he did before he came to the set, or was he working through it while you were in production? Can you just tell me a little bit about that performance and nailing that accent?
Yeah, absolutely. It was something that I think cost him a great deal of stress, having to do with that accent, around 80 Australians, and feeling that he was being judged, or was good or it was bad. But I can tell you, he put in a ton of work prior to the event. We had a lot of talks leading up to it, and I said, if you weren't comfortable with doing the accent, that that you should consider doing it as a British man, and I can address that in the writing. We can make you from England. We can do all sorts of things if you like. But he was adamant, and so we went forward on the prospect that he would do a great job, and he brought everything to the table. When he showed up, he was fully prepared. He had done a play, I believe, in the past where he played an Australian, so he had already done some work with some voice people. And by the time he got there, he was thoroughly engaged in it. Totally got Spencer. Directing him was a complete breeze. He is so prepared. He shows up ready to work, and to the crew, fully respectful, wonderful person. I can't say enough great things. I'm glad to say he's still a friend, and he put a lot into that. And I can tell you, I think it gave him some sleepless nights coming into the event, but everyone on set. I'm no expert on the tones and the nuances, and the accent changes all around the country, similar to Canada, where it's a very large country. And the people in the East Coast talk very different than the people in the West Coast. It's a completely different accent. And so he found his area, and his tone, and his cadence. And I thought he did a great job. And more importantly, the people around me, I would ask them, is his accent? And everyone agreed. They thought he was doing a fantastic job with the accent. So,
Now, just with his casting, just with perhaps your producer hat on, I am very
mm,
interested for you to just address this in all honesty, and just to talk about some of the realities of making an international film production intended for, as you say, a four quadrant family audience. Okay, you've got
Mm,
Bill Nighy in this film. Does a good job, as we've said. Plenty of Australian actors of that age who could have played the role. You've
mm,
got, as you say, Australian actors playing the son and the mother.
yeah, Glory.
They're putting on accents, New
Correct.
York
Yeah.
accents. Can you just tell us, Tim J. Brown, about the realities of doing that? Why not cast an Australian actor with a long history of film? Why not have the Melbourne people speaking in Australian accents? There are, I understand, marketing realities to these decisions. Can you just tell them a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the story was about an American boy coming to Australia. So, and his mom was American. So that was the whole, that those two had to be sort of, I say American, only in that that's where they're from in the story is from New York City. But both of those characters had to be American. Doing an official co-production, certain amount of the cast needs to be represented by Australia. So of course we put Australians into that. And as you well know, many, many Australian actors all can perform a very, very strong American accent. So Milan was less accustomed to it, but the woman playing his mother, of course, she was fantastic. She had done American accents before. She was well suited to that. So that was a decision based around co-production requirements. So it was very political. Regarding casting Bill, we had gone to I'm not going to mention any names of who we went to, but we had gone to some very prominent Australian actors who I was fans of previous that we had gone to before that we couldn't make a deal work. We had narrowed down 5 people that we felt were very strong, and one of those was Bill Nighy. Part of that as a producer, we actually use analytics to look at 4 quadrant family films. These analytics can take out certain actors, determine their audiences, determine the kind of people that watch their movies. So we narrowed down to 5. 4 of them were Australian, one wasn't. 3 of them we went to previous, and we couldn't make a deal, work with those individuals for numerous different reasons. And we ended up going to Bill at that point in time to play an Australian. But no, we had gone to definitely some Australians, and all of them you would very well know who they are. They're very, we know who the prominent ones in the age group between 65 and 75. That we felt would have been terrific in that. Some of them, the analytics said that we wouldn't feel would get enough revenue out of international markets, but the ones that we did go to, that we gone to first, we really felt would be terrific in the roles. And at the end of the day, we couldn't make that deal work for numerous different reasons.
Of course. Okay. When you talk about analytics, this is an area of filmmaking that I don't think a lot of people would be that aware of. What you're talking there, I understand, would be the research, the marketing research that breaks down the appeal of an actor, the performance of their films, and where that actor is likely to play strongest in international
Yeah,
markets.
we work with a company that has a program where the computer actually, believe it or not, reads the script. The computer pulls out script attributes. So you've got the script attributes such as a single mom, the death of a father, a relationship between a grandfather and a son, a boy and a dog. Every nuance of the project that you write, aspect nuances that I think 30,000 different attributes it actually determines within a screenplay. From that, it actually pulls out those little pieces. So when you look at an actor and it says Tom Cruise, you know that action fans love Tom Cruise and women love Tom Cruise, and there's different points of this analytics. So if you can get as many of those points married between the actor and the points within our script, we try and match as many of those as possible, and you get what's a ranking. So Bill Nye would have a 98% chance of success, and another actor might have a 54% chance of success. So we would just go to the highest possible chance of success based on the actor's past film performances. So has Bill played a grandfather before? Has this Bill appeal to women between 45 and 55? Does Bill, and it's so when you put the actor's name into the attributes, it actually will give a percentage ranking chance of success. So someone might have a 20% chance of success in the same role, whereas Bill would have a 89% chance of success. I'm not; these are the actual numbers, but that's how the analytics work. So we go to the computer a lot of the times. The computer reads the script, and then the computer marries as many attributes from the actor's past performances and puts in a success estimate based on those past performances. So different actors have different success chances. So it's very specific and very much based on the script. It's really there isn't a studio that's not doing it now. There's really they're all doing it. Netflix is obviously has their entire existence and programming is based around their analytics. So there's no difference between them, Amazon, MGM, Disney. They all do it now.
Is this one computer program, or are there a number of them?
Million, yeah, there's different analytics programs for different strokes for different folks, but the programs all sort of try and figure out the same thing: is what does the computer think is the best chance for success based on the performer, based on the genre, and based on other script attributes as well. So it's a pretty fascinating thing to research, and it gets nuances that you never even considered.
Now, Tim J. Brown, that might be the most interesting thing I've heard in a long time. As a aging film critic, I have often joked about computer written films. I've even made up a brand name for them called the Auto Write computer writing program. But what you're saying is that while computers might not be writing screenplays, they do analyze them and they do read them and give notes.
Totally.
Okay.
Yep.
That is extraordinary.
Yeah. Which, I think it's, I don't think the day we completely rely on that, we're really missing what made film so great in my mind. And, I don't know if you can understand, a computer can understand what makes Buster Keaton such a genius individual, or why the Marx Brothers are funny. But there needs to be, I think, a marriage between, you talk about an old film critic. I consider myself an old film critic as well. I've grown up with film since the age of 2, and it's been my entire existence and for my business life. So I think there is a marriage between where we were with the way we used to buy films. And, even 10 years ago or 15 years ago, you'd read a script, you'd look at it, you'd say, who's the cast? And you'd think, okay, well, if we market this right, this might work in this territory, it might work and do well in Germany, it might do well here, it might do well there. And we try and put a financial number to it to determine whether or not it's worthy of actually making the film. Now it's you don't, I hate to see the day if we totally rely on the computers, because I think that's a mistake. I think there's, film people need to still get involved and get an understanding is, will people like this story? Because you just never know until you release it.
It's an important point to make from an artist's point of view about the primacy of writing a story and creating a narrative that you believe will touch people. We can talk about computers, and it does tend to begin to have a very clinical, calculated, cold feel to it. And I guess that is something as an artist you would certainly always want to be very wary of, and perhaps be a bit resistant to at times.
Completely, totally. As a writer, I could care less what a computer thinks of my writing. I have to. I create. I always say you start with a blank canvas, and then you narrow down the best painting you can possibly make. But the computer can't help create something from that blank canvas, I think, that appeals to the human condition. So and then later there's a marriage between the two. But right now, I do believe the artist right now holds all the cards, and not a computer program.
Tim J. Brown, how does Buckley's Chance fit into your filmography, both as a director and as a producer? Because you've done a wide variety of films. You've done horror films. You've done all sorts of movies. How does Buckley's Chance fit in to your career trajectory and into your filmography?
I think it's certainly the most emotional thing I've done. It was certainly touched me in many levels, from the connection between the boy and the grandfather and his mother. I feel that that telling that story, the emotionality of those characters, I hadn't really gone into something, I guess, that dramatic before. I always find you're either trying to scare people or you're trying to make them laugh through film. A lot of times I tried to do both. I did a lot of kids movies. So, it's a lot different trying to make a 5 or 6 year old laugh in a movie, because I always think a pie in the face works at every level, whether you're in Germany or whether you're in Israel or whether you're in Japan. A pie in the face is funny to kids, so you can always do the slapstick stuff, which I think has been a lot of fun doing, but it doesn't really connect the emotionality that this film did. So and I was emotional through it. People were tearing up a lot, and Bill gets emotional in the film, and it has moments I'd like to think that people will tear up a little bit, and reflect on themselves and their relationships with other people and nature. So I think from that perspective, thematically, it was certainly it was a more of a challenging thing than I'd ever done before. I really wanted to tell that story.
And can you tell me a bit about Joker Films? This is a production company that you started up some time ago. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was in 2009, and it started as an international sales agency, basically going territory to territory, buying and selling feature films, which I had a lot of experience in. And then once I did that for a while, I really determined and figured out that I wanted to control the content and own the content. And so we started developing our own ideas, developing our own properties, and all the films I've directed, I sort of came up with the idea on my own. Every one of them except, I believe, Devil in the Dark, which was someone else's idea that I just simply directed. But the rest of them were sort of born out of my own ridiculous head, and just decided to write a script or hire a writer and nurture that a little bit and then make a film. But I was able to have enough relationships to be able to put together the financing for the movie at that point in time. So that's how
Okay.
that came to be.
How did you get into filmmaking? What got you into filmmaking? How did you get into it, and why?
I've been, since I had a great uncle who was more like a grandfather to me, who was a booker for Warner Brothers. And from the age of 2, we would go screen 35 mil prints in his basement. He actually had a 35 mil projector. And so I grew up watching the Marx Brothers and Buster Keaton and Laurel and Hardy, and, everything else that a young lad would watch at that age. And through that, I've evolved into being extremely passionate about films. Two films, of course, that affected me, like many others, was The Godfather and Jaws, that really, hit me to a level of, extreme passion, where I felt this is where I need to be, and I need to be involved in this. And yeah, I went to acting school in New York City, tried to be an actor for a while, and then basically got in the business of film. And through the business of film, it allowed me to develop enough relationships where I could finance movies at the same time. So it's been a lifelong journey of total passion for cinema, and it's really all I really know and understand at a really deep level. So I do love it, and deeply, yeah. And it started from as far back as I could ever remember, where the passion for film came to be at every level: performing, selling, buying, writing, directing. But directing is really where my heart is, for sure.
Your relationship with your grandfather, did that have anything to do with the idea behind Buckley's chance?
No, that was just simply he had passed many years ago, but it was more of he was a great uncle, actually. He was an uncle of mine, but yeah, he would deeply connected me to film, and I think even before I knew it, I would watch Yankee Doodle Dandy, or a film he would show me, Blazing Saddles, something we would see in his basement, and
That's
I
great.
would just be totally passionate about it, and I never stopped.
What's the state of the Canadian film industry at the moment?
Similar to Australia, it's very strong right now. Yeah, but I think it's a lot of American companies and Netflix, obviously streaming companies, coming to Canada to direct, shoot, and produce films there. There's very beneficial tax credits that are in place that allow governments to come in. You guys have the QUAPE rebate. We have labor rebates and all spend rebates. Some of the states in the U.S. Give rebates, but certainly not to the extent I think that Canada and Australia does. We're very strong in that. Like Australia, we can provide a big city environment, an ocean environment, a studio environment. There's great sound stages in both countries, and of course, there's every territory known to man, from from farmlands to mountains to deserty kind of areas. So the industry, I think, is very strong. Canadian content, on the other hand, that's where we strive to try and develop our own stories. Again, with Australia, I think much of your production, there's a lot of Marvel movies, a lot of foreign financing. So actually, Australian films now, I think, are also doing quite well, because your box office is able to. And during COVID, when the box office American movies weren't coming to theaters, you guys really have a chance for Indigenous programming to shine. And I hope Buckley's chance is part of that in Indigenous programming, because it's an official Canadian Australian co-production. So we're really proud of that. There's not a lot of them, and I think there should be more.
Are you planning on doing more co-productions with Australia?
I would love to. Just it's a question of the opportunity of the story and the screenplay, and if that ever comes to be the light, I would embrace it wholeheartedly to get back there.